I gave my baby up for adoption 16 years ago. Last month, I realized he's been sitting in my English class the whole semester. Posted to r/am/ithasshole. I don't even know if this is the right subreddit. I don't know if there is a right subreddit for what I'm going through. But I need to tell someone before I completely lose my mind, and I can't tell anyone in my real life because the moment I say the words out loud, everything changes forever. I, 37F, am a high school English teacher. I've been teaching for 12 years now, the last 3 at a small public high school in a suburb I moved to for the job. It's a good school. Good kids. The kind of place where you know your students' names, where you run into their parents at the grocery store, where teaching feels like it matters. 3 weeks ago, I was grading essays in my classroom after school. It was late, maybe 6 p.m., and the building was mostly empty. I had a stack of personal narratives for my third-period juniors, the usual mix of sports achievements and summer vacations, and the occasional genuinely moving piece about loss or identity. I picked up the next paper in the stack. Read the name. Felt my heart stop. It wasn't the name that did it. I'd been reading his name on papers for 6 weeks by then. It was what I saw when I flipped to the emergency contact form stapled to the back, something I'd never looked at closely before. The adoptive parents' names. The birthday listed in the school records. November 14th. The same birthday I've marked silently every year for 16 years. I sat there in my empty classroom, holding this essay about summer camping trips, and I understood with absolute, devastating clarity that the boy who sits in the third row, second seat from the window, the one with the quick laugh and the stubborn streak and the way he argues about symbolism in The Great Gatsby like it personally offends him, is my son. The son I gave up for adoption when I was 21 years old. I need to explain what happened 16 years ago, because I know how this sounds. I know some people are going to read this and think I'm a monster for what I did, and others are going to think I'm a monster for what I'm doing now. Maybe both groups are right. When I was 21, I was a junior in college. I was studying English literature, working part-time at a bookstore, barely making ends meet. I came from a family that had nothing, not nothing in the dramatic, tragic sense, just nothing in the we couldn't have helped even if we'd wanted to sense. My mother worked 2 jobs and still couldn't cover rent sometimes. My father wasn't in the picture. I had student loans piling up and a vague dream of becoming a writer that I'd already started to realize wasn't going to pay the bills. The pregnancy was an accident. The father was a guy I'd been seeing for about 4 months. Nice enough, but not serious. When I told him, he panicked. Said he wasn't ready to be a dad. Said he'd support whatever decision I made, in that particular tone that means, please don't make me be involved in this. I considered every option. I really did. I lay awake for weeks thinking about what kind of life I could give a child. I was 21. I had no money, no stability, no support system. I was living in a studio apartment with a hot plate and a mattress on the floor. I couldn't even take care of myself properly. I was skipping meals to afford textbooks. And I thought about what I wanted for this baby. This tiny, theoretical person who hadn't asked to be born into my chaos. I wanted them to have a stable home with 2 parents who were ready. I wanted them to have a yard and a dog and the kind of childhood where you don't know what it feels like to be hungry because your mom couldn't afford groceries that week. I wanted to give them a chance at the life I never had. So I chose adoption. Closed adoption, specifically, because I knew myself well enough to know I couldn't handle an open arrangement. I was barely holding it together as it was. The idea of watching my child grow up from a distance, of being the ghost hovering at the edges of someone else's family, I couldn't do it. I thought it would be easier for everyone if we made a clean break. The adoption agency matched me with a couple who seemed perfect. I never met them in person, that was part of the closed arrangement, but I read their profile. They were in their 30s, financially stable, desperate for a baby after years of trying. They had a house in the suburbs. They had a dog. They had everything I couldn't give. I gave birth on November 14th. I held him for exactly 47 minutes. He had dark hair and a red, wrinkled face and tiny fingers that wrapped around my thumb like he already knew me. And then I handed him to the social worker and I walked away and I tried to convince myself I'd done the right thing. For 16 years, I've told myself that story. I did the right thing. I gave him a better life. I made an impossible choice and I lived with it because the alternative was raising a child in poverty and chaos and probably ruining both our lives. I didn't know that 16 years later, I'd be grading his essays about summer camping trips and watching him laugh with his friends in a hallway and wondering if he knows that the way he tilts his head when he's thinking is exactly like me. He sits in the third row, second seat from the window. Every day I teach him about literature and pretend I don't know how he got his smile. It's mine. I look at him and I see my own mouth, my own expressions, My own stubborn way of setting my jaw when I disagree with something. He's tall and lanky and his hair is darker than mine. He must get that from his father, but his eyes are the exact shade of brown I see in the mirror every morning. When he's concentrating, he bites his lower lip the same way I do. When he's frustrated, he runs his hand through his hair the same way I do. And his mind, God, his mind. He's brilliant in the way that makes teaching feel like it means something. He tears through books like they're oxygen. He writes essays that make me want to cry with how good they are, how insightful, how raw. He argues with me about themes and symbols and characterization, and I have to remind myself not to smile too much because a teacher shouldn't look that delighted when a student tells her she's wrong about 1984. He loves books the way I love books. He uses words the way I use words. He has the same stubborn streak that got me through college, the same fierce independence, the same refusal to back down when he believes he's right. I gave him up so he could have a better life. And watching him every day, I told myself it worked. He seemed happy. He had friends. He talked about his family like they were good people, vacations and inside jokes and the kind of easy affection that comes from a stable home. But 3 weeks ago, everything changed. Update 1. It's been a month since I figured out the truth. A month of sitting in my classroom pretending to be just his teacher, pretending every conversation doesn't feel like a small miracle and a knife to the chest at the same time. Things have gotten worse. He came into class one Monday looking like he hadn't slept. Eyes red. Jaw tight. He sat down in his seat and stared at his desk and didn't participate at all, which is completely unlike him. He's usually the first one to raise his hand, the first one to challenge an interpretation, the first one to get into a friendly argument with his classmates about whether Holden Caulfield is sympathetic or insufferable. That day, he was silent. He handed in an essay that was half the length it should have been. He left as soon as the bell rang without saying goodbye, which he always does. He always lingers, always has one more question, one more observation. It took me a week to figure out what happened. His adoptive parents are getting divorced. I found out from another teacher, who mentioned it casually in the staff room. Did you hear about the situation in third period? His parents are splitting up. Apparently it's pretty ugly. She didn't even know which student she was talking about. But I knew. I knew instantly. The adoption was closed for a reason. I made that choice. But I never imagined I'd have to sit across from him and pretend I'm just his teacher while his world falls apart. After that, things got complicated in ways I never anticipated. He started staying after class. At first it was just a few minutes here and there, a question about the reading, a clarification about an assignment. But over the past few weeks, it's become a regular thing. He lingers. He sits on the desk in the front row and talks to me about books, about writing, about life. He confides in me. I know I should stop it. I know I should maintain appropriate boundaries, redirect him to the school counselor, keep things professional. But he's not saying anything inappropriate. He's just talking. And I'm just listening. And every conversation feels like a gift I don't deserve. He told me his parents are fighting over the house. Over assets. Over him, like he's a thing to be divided rather than a person. He said his mom has been crying every night and his dad moved into an apartment across town and he doesn't know which parent he's supposed to be loyal to. They're both acting like I have to choose, he said last week, sitting on that desk with his legs swinging like he was still a little kid. Like loving one of them means betraying the other. I wanted to tell him that's not how love works. That you can love multiple people at once. That the heart doesn't operate on a zero-sum basis. Instead, I said something about how divorce is hard on everyone, how it's not his job to fix his parents' marriage, how his only responsibility is to take care of himself right now. Teacher things. Safe things. He nodded like he appreciated it. Then he looked at me with those eyes, my eyes, and said, "You're the only adult who actually listens to me." I had to turn away and pretend to organize papers on my desk so he wouldn't see my face. Update 2. 2 weeks ago, he handed me an essay that broke me. The assignment was personal narrative, write about a moment that changed you, a turning point in your understanding of yourself or your world. I expected the usual topics, a sports victory, a grandparent's death, a realization about friendship or identity. His essay was about feeling like he doesn't belong anywhere. He wrote about growing up with this persistent sense that something was missing. He wrote about looking at his parents, his adoptive parents, though he didn't know that yet, and loving them but also feeling like a puzzle piece jammed into the wrong puzzle. He wrote about studying his face in the mirror and wondering where certain features came from. He wrote about the specific loneliness of knowing you're loved but still feeling like an outsider in your own family. His essay was about feeling like he doesn't belong anywhere. I wanted to scream, "You belong to me, you've always belonged to me." I took that essay home and read it 6 times. I cried so hard I couldn't breathe. And then I wrote feedback in the margins like a professional, like a teacher, like someone who hadn't just read her son's raw, aching confusion about his own identity. Powerful imagery, I wrote. Consider expanding the scene at the dinner table. What specific details made you feel like an outsider? What I wanted to write: you were never supposed to feel this way. I gave you up because I thought you'd be happy. I thought you'd have everything I couldn't give you. I didn't know you'd spend 16 years wondering where you came from. I gave him an A. It was the hardest A I've ever given. The situation escalated 3 days ago. He stayed after class again, but this time he was different. Agitated. His leg was bouncing against the desk, that restless energy I recognize because I have it too, that inability to sit still when emotions are running high. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Like, a personal question?" My heart stopped. For one wild second, I thought somehow he knew. I thought he'd figured it out, connected the dots, realized why I look at him the way I do. "Of course," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Do you think—" He stopped. Started again. "Do you think birth parents ever regret giving up their kids?" The room went silent. The kind of silent where you can hear the fluorescent lights buzzing, where every second stretches into an eternity. I should have given him a careful, measured teacher response. Something about how every situation is different, how we can't know what's in another person's heart, how the decision to place a child for adoption is complex and personal. Instead, I said, "Every single day." He looked at me. Really looked at me. And I felt tears sliding down my face and I couldn't stop them, and he didn't even notice I was crying. Or maybe he did notice but thought I was just an emotional teacher who cared too much about my students. "That's what I figured," he said quietly. And then he left. Update 3. I know now why he asked that question. His parents told him. During one of their fights, apparently, the worst possible way to deliver that information, in the middle of a screaming match about custody and assets and who gets the house. His mom blurted it out, "You're not even biologically ours and we're still fighting over you." He told me this 2 days ago. He was crying. My son was crying in my classroom and I couldn't hold him. I couldn't tell him the truth. I couldn't do anything except sit there and be his teacher and hand him tissues and tell him that adopted doesn't mean less loved. "She didn't mean it like that," he said, wiping his face. "I know she didn't. She was just angry. But it still hurts," I finished for him. He nodded. "I've spent my whole life feeling like something was wrong with me. Like I was missing a piece. And now I know why. I'm not really theirs." "You are theirs," I said, because I had to. Because it's true, in all the ways that matter. Biology doesn't determine family. They chose you. They raised you. They love you. But even as I said it, I could hear how hollow it sounded. Because I was sitting right there, his biological mother, and I couldn't tell him. I was the missing piece he'd been searching for his entire life, and I was 3 feet away pretending to be a stranger. He started searching. He mentioned it casually at first. I signed up for one of those DNA ancestry sites, like it was just curiosity, just a homework project for his own identity. But I know better. I can see the intensity in his eyes, the desperation underneath the casual tone. He's looking for me. He doesn't know I'm right here. The closed adoption was supposed to protect everyone. Protect him from a birth mother who wasn't ready, who might have destabilized his life with her presence. Protect me from the pain of watching from the sidelines, never quite a mother but never quite free either. Protect his adoptive parents from having to share their son with a ghost. But now he's 17 and actively searching, and I'm sitting in my classroom every day watching him chase something he's already found. Last week he came in with a folder full of papers. "I'm trying to get my adoption records unsealed," he said. "It's really complicated in this state. But I found a lawyer who might be able to help." My mouth went dry. That's a big step. "I need to know," he said. "I need to know who she is. Why she gave me up. If she ever—" He stopped. "If she ever thinks about me." Every single day, I wanted to say. Every single day for 16 years. Every November 14th. Every time I see a boy who looks about your age. Every night when I lie awake wondering if I made the right choice. "I'm sure she does," I said instead. Update 4. I've spent the past week researching adoption law, and I think I finally understand the full scope of what I'm facing. In this state, the original birth certificate is sealed. Adoption records are closed. For him to legally access my identifying information, he'd have to petition the court and demonstrate good cause, which is intentionally vague and rarely granted. The whole system is designed to protect birth parents who chose closed adoptions, who made a choice about their privacy that's supposed to be respected forever. But here's the thing, I could come forward. I could unseal it from my end. I could register with the state's mutual consent registry and wait to see if he searches there. I could contact his adoptive parents and explain the situation. I could tell him the truth. But what would that do to him? He's already reeling from his parents' divorce. He's already struggling with the revelation that he's adopted. He's already feeling like his whole identity is a lie. And now I'm supposed to walk in and say, "Hey, by the way, your English teacher, the person you've been confiding in for months, is actually your biological mother." Surprise. Would that help him? Or would it destroy whatever stability he has left? He trusts me as his teacher. He trusts that our relationship is what it appears to be, a student and a mentor, simple and uncomplicated. If I tell him the truth, I take that away. I turn every conversation we've ever had into something different. Something potentially manipulative. Something that might feel like a betrayal. And his adoptive parents, they don't know I'm here. They didn't choose this. They signed up for a closed adoption, which means they signed up for a birth mother who stays gone. If I reveal myself, I'm violating that agreement. I'm inserting myself into their family without their consent. I keep going around and around in circles. Some days I think the right thing is to tell him. He's searching anyway. He's going to keep searching until he finds something, and wouldn't it be better if he found me, the real me, the person who's already in his life, instead of a name on a piece of paper? Other days I think the right thing is to stay silent. To let him search on his own terms, to find me, or not, through official channels, to maintain the boundaries that were supposed to protect everyone. I gave him up so he could have a better life. Now I'm watching him fall apart and I can't do anything without destroying everything. Update 5. Yesterday, he asked me to write him a college recommendation letter. He sat in my classroom after the final bell, fidgeting with the strap of his backpack, and asked me if I'd be willing to write about his work in my class, his growth as a writer, his potential. "You're the teacher who knows me best," he said. "I know we've only worked together for one semester, but I feel like you actually see me. You know." I said yes. Of course I said yes. What else could I say? But now I'm supposed to sit down and write a letter about this student, my son, and describe his qualities and his potential and why some college should admit him. I'm supposed to write about him like I'm an objective observer, like I'm just his English teacher, like I don't see myself in every word he writes. I started drafting the letter last night. I got 3 sentences in before I had to stop. "He has an exceptional gift for language," I wrote. "His essays demonstrate a depth of emotional intelligence and insight that is rare in a student his age. He approaches literature not as a subject to be studied, but as a mirror for the human condition, and his analyses reflect a mind that is both analytical and deeply empathetic." I wrote, "He has his mother's love of words." Then I deleted it. Then I cried for an hour. Then I started over. This morning, something happened that changed everything. He came into class early, before any other students arrived. He looked different, calmer somehow, but also more determined. He sat down in his usual seat and waited until I looked up from my desk. "I think I'm getting close," he said. The lawyer found something in my adoption file. A letter. My heart stopped beating. "What kind of letter?" I asked, and my voice came out strange, too high, too thin. "A letter from my birth mother. She wrote it when she gave me up. The lawyer says they're not supposed to give it to me until I turn 18, but she pulled some strings." He paused. "She made a copy." I couldn't breathe. Have you read it?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not yet. I wanted to wait. I wanted to be ready." He looked at me with those eyes, my eyes, and said, "I'm scared of what it'll say. What if she didn't want me? What if she just threw me away?" I wanted to tell him everything. Right then, in that moment, I wanted to take his face in my hands and tell him that I loved him more than I've ever loved anything, that giving him up was the hardest thing I ever did, that I've spent 16 years wondering if I made the right choice and 16 years missing him and 16 years trying to convince myself that his happiness was worth my devastation. But I didn't. "I'm sure she loved you," I said. "I'm sure whatever she wrote came from a place of love, not rejection." He looked at me for a long moment. "How do you know?" "Because no one gives up a child easily," I said. "And anyone who writes a letter to the baby they're placing for adoption, that's not someone who's throwing you away. That's someone who wanted you to know, someday, that you mattered to them." He nodded slowly. "Thanks," he said. "I mean it. You always know the right thing to say." If only he knew how wrong he was. I wrote that letter 16 years ago. I remember every word. To my child. I'm writing this because I want you to know the truth, even if I'm not brave enough to tell you myself. I want you to know that I loved you from the moment I knew you existed. I want you to know that giving you up was not about you. It was never about you. It was about me, and my limitations, and my desperate hope that someone else could give you what I couldn't. I was 21 years old. I had nothing to offer you except love, and love isn't enough when you can't afford food or rent or the kind of stability a child deserves. I wanted you to have everything. I wanted you to have parents who were ready, who could give you a yard and a dog and bedtime stories and college funds and all the things I could only dream about. If you're reading this, you're old enough to understand. Sometimes love means letting go. Sometimes the most selfless thing a parent can do is admit they're not the right parent for their child. I will think about you every day for the rest of my life. I will wonder what you look like, who you've become, whether you inherited my stubborn streak or my love of books. I will mark your birthday every year, silently, in my heart. I hope you never need to find me. I hope your life is so full and so happy that you never feel the absence of the woman who gave you up. But if you do need me someday, if you ever want to know where you came from, I hope you'll understand that I did the best I could with what I had. I gave you away because I loved you. That's the only truth that matters. Your birth mother. He's going to read that letter. Maybe today. Maybe tonight. And then he's going to look at the name attached to it, my name, and he's going to search for me, and he's going to find out that his English teacher, the person he's been confiding in for months, is the woman who wrote those words. Or maybe he won't. Maybe the records will stay sealed. Maybe he'll hit bureaucratic roadblocks and give up. Maybe he'll decide he doesn't want to know after all. Either way, I'm trapped. If he finds out on his own, he'll feel betrayed. He'll realize I've known this whole time and never told him. He'll wonder if every conversation was manipulation, if every piece of advice was tainted by my secret. If he never finds out, I'll spend the rest of my life watching him from a distance. Watching him graduate. Watching him go to college. Watching him build a life, maybe a family, never knowing that the woman who taught him about The Great Gatsby is the same woman who held him for 47 minutes on November 14th and then walked away. He asked me yesterday if I thought birth parents ever regret giving up their kids. I said, every single day, and he didn't even notice I was crying. So here's my question, Reddit. Here's what I can't figure out on my own. Do I have the right to tell him? Not the legal right. I know I could find ways around that. Registry, direct contact, a conversation with his adoptive parents. Legally, there are paths forward. But morally, ethically, humanly, do I have the right to walk into his life and append everything he knows? Do I have the right to turn his trusted teacher into his birth mother, to transform every conversation we've had into something he didn't consent to? Or is my silence the greater cruelty? Is watching him search, knowing he might search forever without finding me, worse than the shock of revelation? I made the right decision at 21. I know that. I couldn't have raised him. I couldn't have given him what he needed. But that doesn't make this easier. That doesn't tell me what to do now. He's sitting in my classroom right now. I wrote this post during my free period, and in 20 minutes, I'm going to teach him about beloved and the nature of motherhood and the wounds that never fully heal, and I'm going to look at his face and see my own features staring back at me, and I'm going to pretend that I'm just his teacher. I'm going to pretend that my heart isn't breaking. I'm going to pretend that I don't know exactly what it feels like to be the mother who loves her child so much she destroys herself to give him something better. And I'm going to come home tonight and read your responses and try to figure out if there's any version of this story where everyone ends up okay. Is my silence protection? Or is it cowardice? Reddit, I genuinely don't know what to do. Edit, thank you to everyone who's commented so far. I'm reading every response, even the ones that are hard to hear. Some of you have been through similar situations. Some of you are adopted and have searched for birth parents. Some of you are telling me I'm a monster for not speaking up sooner. Some of you are telling me I'm doing the right thing by staying silent. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, like most truths. He's going to read that letter soon. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow. And then whatever happens next is out of my hands. But I'll update when I know more. Either way, whether he finds me or I find the courage to tell him, I'll let you know what happens. Thank you for listening. Thank you for helping me feel less alone in this impossible situation. I've spent 16 years wondering if I made the right choice giving him up. Now I'm spending every day wondering if I'm making the right choice keeping silent. Some questions don't have good answers. I'm starting to realize that maybe this is one of them. Here's what no one tells you about closed adoption. You can close the file, but you can't close your heart. He sits in the third row, second seat from the window. Every day I teach him about literature and pretend I don't know how he got his smile. It's mine. His eyes are mine. The way he tilts his head when he's thinking, mine. The stubborn streak, the love of books, the way he argues about symbolism like it personally offends him, all mine. I held him for 47 minutes on November 14th, 16 years ago. Then I handed him to a social worker and walked away. I was 21. I had nothing to offer except love, and love isn't enough when you can't afford food or rent or the kind of stability a child deserves. I gave him up so he could have a better life. A yard. A dog. Parents who were ready. I never imagined I'd move to a random town for a job and find him sitting in my third period English class. The adoption was closed for a reason. I made that choice. But I never imagined I'd have to sit across from him and pretend I'm just his teacher while his world falls apart. His parents are divorcing. They told him he's adopted, screamed it during a fight. Now he's searching for his birth mother. He signed up for DNA sites. He hired a lawyer. He's chasing someone he's already found. He asked me yesterday if I thought birth parents ever regret giving up their kids. I said, every single day, and he didn't even notice I was crying. His essay was about feeling like he doesn't belong anywhere. I wanted to scream, "You belong to me, you've always belonged to me." I gave him up so he could have a better life. Now I'm watching him fall apart and I can't do anything without destroying everything. If I tell him, I turn every conversation we've had into something he didn't consent to. His trusted teacher becomes the woman who abandoned him. Every piece of advice becomes manipulation in hindsight. If I stay silent, I watch him search forever. I watch him read my letter, the one I wrote 16 years ago, and hunt for a woman who's sitting 3 feet away. He's going to find my name eventually. He's going to realize his English teacher is his birth mother. And he's going to wonder why I never told him. Is my silence protection? Or is it cowardice? I made the right decision at 21. I know that. But that doesn't tell me what to do now. Some questions don't have good answers. I'm starting to realize this is one of them.